Whispers from the forgotten maps. You open an old atlas. The paper smells of time, faint dust, dried ink, the musk of long journeys. As your fingertips move across the yellowed pages, your eyes fall upon a word that no modern map carries: Tartaria. The letters stretch across a space so large it almost defies comprehension, from the frozen reaches of Siberia to the distant deserts beyond the Caspian, from the edges of China's mountains to the Arctic's unreachable tundra. Great Tartary, Independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary. The labels change with each century, yet they all point to something vast, mysterious, and strangely absent from the world you know today. You pause. You've heard whispers of it before: the Tartarian Empire, some call it, a kingdom erased from memory. Others dismiss it as a misunderstanding, a cartographic shorthand that once described nothing more than lands unknown to Europe. But the more you stare at those maps, the harder it becomes to shake the feeling that something doesn't quite fit. The old atlases printed by Dutch and Italian craftsmen depict Tartaria with the same confident ink used for France or Persia. Cities are marked with towers, roads run like veins through snowfields and steppe. There are borders, emblems, even royal insignia. Who drew these, and why in today's history books does Tartaria merit barely a passing mention? Your imagination drifts to the candlelit studies of 17th century cartographers, men like Mercator and Ortelius, drawing by hand the shapes of continents half glimpsed through fog and rumor. They gathered notes from explorers, missionaries, traders. They spoke of Tartars, fierce horsemen, nomads of the endless north, and they wrote of cities with golden domes rising from the plains. The name Tartaria became a vast placeholder for mystery itself, and yet the details are too specific. Towns with names like Tobolsk, Samarkand, and Cathay, mountain ranges labeled Belertag, rivers drawn in ink, so sure that it feels less like imagination and more like memory. Could these have been fragments of a once unified civilization scattered across centuries like pieces of a forgotten mosaic? You lean closer, the lamplight trembling. Some say Tartaria was not merely a geographic label, but a civilization erased. According to this view, the world once held an empire of advanced builders and engineers, masters of architecture and energy, whose works were later claimed by others. Their cathedrals and palaces, these believers argue, still stand in St. Petersburg and Istanbul and Prague, their strange symmetry and electric ornamentation echoing technologies we no longer understand. But official history disagrees. The scholars of today will tell you that Tartary was never a single empire at all. The word they insist was a European umbrella for everything east of the Urals that lay beyond clear comprehension: Mongols, Turks, Uzbeks, and the scattered tribes of Central Asia. They say that as the Russian Empire expanded, it absorbed these regions, and the name Tartary simply faded away, a ghost of geography, replaced by clearer lines of empire and nation. Still, the maps remain, and maps, like memories, have their own quiet persistence. You imagine a European traveler in the 1600s, perhaps a Jesuit envoy from Lisbon, perhaps a Dutch merchant seeking trade along the Volga, stepping into the vastness of the steppe. He would write of cities carved with strange artistry, of people who spoke languages neither east nor west, of grand ruins half buried in sand. He might send sketches back home: towers capped with globes, bridges built of stone so finely cut that no mortar was visible. When his reports arrived in Amsterdam or Paris, the mapmakers would trace them in ink and call the place Tartaria. And perhaps, just perhaps, those reports contain more truth than anyone dared believe. As night deepens, the flicker of your lamp reveals faint outlines of dragons and wind gods drawn in the map's corners, mythic guardians of unknown lands. You trace the Silk Road winding through this realm, connecting China to the West. Somewhere along that line, Marco Polo once traveled. He spoke of Cathay and the great Khan of golden cities where bells rang in towers taller than any in Venice. Was that Tartaria under another name? It's easy to forget how much of the world once lay unseen. For the scholars of early Europe, much of Asia was mystery upon mystery, where Mongol Khans rose like storms and vanished again into silence. And yet these maps linger, each one whispering of continuity of a name too enduring to be mere accident. In the 18th century, something curious begins to happen. The maps grow clearer, the names sharper. Tartaria shrinks first to Siberia, then to a thin ribbon of territory north of China. By the 19th century, the great empire is gone altogether. Its lands are renamed, reclassified, absorbed. To historians, it's simply the evolution of knowledge. But to those who look deeper, it feels like erasure, the deliberate closing of a chapter. You sit back in your chair feeling the faint hum of curiosity that refuses to quiet. If Tartaria was a mistake, why did it persist for so long across so many maps by so many hands? If it was real, how could an empire of such scope vanish so completely? The silence is almost louder than the evidence itself. And then comes another thought, softer, more haunting. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between. Maybe Tartaria was both myth and memory, a poetic name for the vastness of the steppe, the crossroads of 1,000 cultures, each leaving traces that together form the shadow of an empire. The wind outside rattles your window, and the world feels momentarily larger, as if invisible borders still stretch across the night sky. The glow of the lamp fades, and the map before you blurs in a dream. You imagine the Tartarian plains, silver under moonlight. Herds of horses move like rivers across grass that whispers with age. In the distance, towers shimmer, not quite real, not quite gone, rising from forgotten earth, waiting for history to remember their names. And as your eyelids grow heavy, the last thing you see are those words written across the world's northern crown, Magna Tartaria, the whisper of an empire, or the echo of imagination itself. The great empire of the north. You find yourself standing on the edge of the Eurasian steppe where the winds blow unbroken from horizon to horizon. The air carries the scent of grass smoke in the memory of hooves. Once this sea of land was said to belong to the empire of Tartaria, a vast dominion of the north, older than maps, older perhaps than the histories that tried to contain it. In the flickering candlelight of your mind's eye, you watch travelers arrive from every direction. From Europe come merchants cloaked against the chill, their tongues heavy with stories of distant empires and endless riders. From the east arrive caravans from Cathay, their wheels tracing silent lines in the dust. They meet in a world without fences where the earth itself seems to breathe. For centuries, Europeans spoke of Tartars, fierce, mysterious horsemen said to rule the lands beyond Muscovy and Persia. To the medieval mind, Tartary was less a nation and more a realm of awe, the wild border between the known world and the unknown. Chroniclers wrote of kings who commanded the winds of fortresses that glimmered like crystal in the sun, and of riders who could strike without warning and vanish into mist. But where myth ends and memory begins is not so clear. In early chronicles, Tartary was a word that grew like a shadow stretching from the Volga to the Pacific, encompassing countless tribes and languages, the Mongols, the Turks, the Uzbeks, the Yakuts and others, whose names history half remembers. Each was distinct, yet in the eyes of Europe, they blurred into one vast empire, Tartaria, the great northern world. You imagine yourself traveling with a Venetian trader in the 13th century, crossing frozen rivers toward the court of the great Khan. He writes home of wonders, that strained belief, marble palaces standing in the snow, courtiers dressed in furs and silk, vast libraries filled with maps of the stars. He tells of cities with canals, like Venice, but older than Rome, older perhaps than time itself. It was said that Tartaria was a land of balance between sky and earth, where rulers drew their strength from the heavens and governed through a sacred harmony. To believers in its existence, this was no mere legend, but a reflection of an ancient spiritual order, a civilization that harnessed nature rather than conquering it. Even in European records, faint hints of order appear amid the chaos. Old French maps name capitals like Tobolsk, Karakorum, and Cathay, each marked with royal crests and winding roads. Jesuit reports from the 1600s mention well-built cities and sophisticated systems of irrigation. Some accounts describe towers topped with strange globes or metallic ornaments that glistened even in stormlight structures unlike anything in Europe. And yet there is silence too, a silence deep enough to make one uneasy. No single ruler of Tartaria appears in the official archives, no clear lineage of kings or dynasties. Instead, the empire flickers like a mirage there in one map, gone in the next. It feels less like a political power and more like an echo of a forgotten order, a collective memory from centuries when the world was wider and its borders still unspoken. As you listen to the steppe wind, it's easy to imagine how this myth took hold. The vastness of northern Asia defied simple explanation. From the frozen tundra to the deserts of Turkestan, it was a realm of scale beyond European comprehension. What was unknown was named Tartary, and what was incomprehensible became magical. But there are deeper stories still. In Slavic folklore, there are whispers of a great people of the north, the builders of ancient fortresses whose walls could not be breached. In Siberian legend, there are tales of shining cities swallowed by snow and of a sunken kingdom beneath Lake Baikal. The Yakuts speak of metal domes and subterranean halls filled with sleeping giants. Could these scattered myths be fragments of the same idea and echo of Tartaria that survived in story long after it vanished from maps? You think of the chronicler Giovanni de Pian del Carpine, who rode through Central Asia in the 1240s and returned with astonishment in his eyes. He described an empire disciplined yet otherworldly, governed by mysterious laws, and a ruler who commanded all under heaven. Later travelers would repeat his words, unsure whether they spoke of Mongols, Tartars, or something greater still. And what of the architectural clues left behind? In the remote cities of Siberia and Kazan, Astrakhan and Samarkand stand cathedrals and citadels, built with mathematical precision domes rising like moons over the plains. Historians attribute them to Russian, Persian, or Mongol hands. Yet to those who seek Tartaria's traces, these monuments are signatures of something older, unified, and advanced. The architecture seems to speak a universal language, symmetry, energy, and order. Buildings aligned with solstices, ornamentation that resembles electrical circuits, carvings of stars, globes, and concentric circles, as though their builders understood both the heavens and the forces that move within them. Officially, such designs are aesthetic coincidence. But as you gaze upon them, it's difficult not to feel the tug of wonder. For those who believe the Tartarian Empire truly existed, its erasure was not accidental. They claim it was written out of history, a deliberate act by new powers rising in the 18th and 19th centuries. When Russia, China, and Europe divided the map, they say the memory of Tartaria was scrubbed clean. Its libraries burned, its technologies, repurposed its name, erased from the books that shaped the modern world. To others, this is fantasy, a conspiracy born from nostalgia. They point out that Tartars were simply a collection of peoples, not one empire. The word, they argue, was derived from Tatar, a Mongolic tribe later twisted into Tartar by medieval chroniclers who associated it with Tartarus, the infernal abyss. It was never an empire, they insist, but a reflection of Europe's ignorance, a mirror held up to its fear of the unknown. Yet the power of the idea persists. Even now, in the quiet hours when you look at those maps with their confident ink and sweeping lines, something inside you hesitates. There is an elegance to the myth, a poetry that refuses to die. Perhaps it is because Tartaria speaks not only of lost lands, but of lost certainty, a time when the world was vast and unexplained, and mystery was still part of daily life. Whether empire or illusion, Tartaria is a name that hums in the mind like an old song. As night thickens, you picture again the endless grasslands glowing under aurora skies, the faint silhouettes of towers in the frost. Somewhere in that silence, the empire breathes not as history records it, but as imagination remembers it. And before you drift to sleep, one question remains suspended in the still air around you. If Tartaria never existed, why does it still feel so real? Architecture out of time. The night deepens. The wind outside is still, but in your mind the echo of hoofbeats fades into something else. the sound of chisels of marble being shaped of domes rising into the air. You are no longer on the step. You are standing before a building so intricate, so strange, that time itself seems uncertain around it. Columns of white stone rise toward the sky, each carved with symbols you don't quite recognize, spiral suns and delicate patterns that shimmer faintly in the half-light. Above them, copper domes glint like drops of liquid fire. The windows are tall, framed by arches that curve not in the style of Europe or Asia, but somewhere between a harmony of both and neither. The believers in the Tartarian Empire call such structures architecture out of time. They say these are not merely buildings, but surviving artifacts, fragments of a lost civilization whose design and technology far surpassed what our history allows. To them, the evidence is everywhere. In St. Petersburg, a city built on marshland in the early 18th century, palaces appear as if they had always been there. The Winter Palace, the Hermitage, the grand colonnades along the Neva. They bear a magnificence that seems too sudden, too mature for a city supposedly raised in a generation. How, they ask, could so many colossal buildings emerge from mud and frost so quickly? They point to Chicago, Paris, and Vienna, where 19th century expositions unveiled architectural wonders that seemed to appear overnight, vast halls with towering domes, electric light long before its time, and intricate ornamentation that no modern hand could easily replicate. To the Tartarian believer, these were not exhibitions of progress, they were restorations, facades over remnants of something far older. You walk through these imagined halls in your mind. The air smells faintly of dust and copper. High above a chandelier hangs from an impossible height. The symmetry is mesmerizing, every curve, every angle balanced as if by divine geometry. The ceilings bear patterns that resemble circuit spirals that repeat like waves of sound. Antiquitech, they call it, ancient technology hidden in plain sight. Some say these domes and towers were not decorative at all, but designed to capture natural energy from the ether. That the spires and finials we dismiss as ornament were in truth conductors resonating with invisible currents in the atmosphere. To skeptics, it is fantasy. To believers, it is proof that Tartaria mastered the energy of the earth long before our age of electricity. They point to the lightning rods of cathedrals, the metal crowns of mosques, the domes of government buildings. Why, they ask, do structures built centuries apart share the same forms? The same mysterious metallic symmetry? Could it be that the same lost knowledge once guided them all? As you listen to these theories, the lines between wonder and doubt blur like fog over a river. You recall how in ancient times architecture was more than function, it was philosophy carved in stone. Every line had meaning, every proportion reflected cosmic law. The Pythagoreans built by number, the Persians by star alignment, the Egyptians by the geometry of eternity. Why not the Tartarians too, if they existed? You drift now to Samarkand jewel of Central Asia. Its turquoise domes gleam beneath the desert sun. The Registan's facades shimmer with mosaics that speak of harmony and motion of suns and stars and worlds intertwined. Historians attribute this to Timurid artisans of the 15th century, but to the Tartarian narrative, Samarkand is one of the last living fragments of the old empire preserved in brick and tile. In one of the great cathedrals of Europe, St. Basil's in Moscow, with its dreamlike colors, or the domed towers of Kazan, which blend Islamic Russian and something else entirely, were these mere regional hybrids or memories of a shared design language lost to time. In this twilight space between skepticism and belief, you begin to understand the allure. The Tartarian story offers not just mystery, but meaning, a sense that humanity once possessed a higher harmony between art, science, and spirit. That the old builders knew something we have forgotten how to build, not merely with stone, but with resonance, proportion, and rhythm. The believers show images of star forts, geometric citadels shaped like flowers scattered across continents in France, Italy, India, and even the American plains. How, they ask, could so many fortresses built supposedly by different nations share identical patterns? Some see in them the fingerprints of Tartaria defensive energy structures, or perhaps sacred geometric installations misunderstood as military designs. You pause before one such structure on an ancient map, a star fort with perfect symmetry surrounded by water, its walls glowing faintly in moonlight. The air hums as if alive. You can almost believe it that this was not defense but design, part of a global pattern that once connected cities like notes in a vast, unseen symphony. Yet the rational part of your mind whispers another story. Architecture, after all, is also imitation. The domes of St. Petersburg may echo the Renaissance, which itself borrowed from Byzantium, which inherited from Persia. Beauty travels and builders borrow. Perhaps Tartaria is not the origin, but the reflection, a tapestry woven from 1,000 hands across time. Still, the feeling remains. When you stand before an old building whose foundations lie buried below the modern street level, when you see stonework that no modern quarry could easily replicate, when you notice the same motifs in cathedrals, mosques, and government halls across continents, you can't help but feel that some silent lineage connects them. Maybe Tartaria is not a place at all, but a pattern, a recurring vision of perfection that civilizations keep rediscovering and losing again. You picture a stonemason centuries ago working under the stars. He doesn't know his name will be forgotten. He only knows that each curve of his chisel must mirror the heavens. Perhaps his work became part of St. Petersburg, or Kazan, or Samarkand, and through his silent devotion, a trace of Tartaria endures. Outside, the wind sighs through the streets, brushing past old facades that still carry whispers of symmetry. You close your eyes and imagine the domes humming faintly with the power of forgotten ages. Whether built by Tartarians or not, these monuments remind you of one truth that transcends time: that beauty once created never truly dies. And as the stars reflect softly on the glass of your window, you sense that somewhere in the geometry of the night, the lost architecture of the world still stands waiting for dreamers to remember its shape. The energy of the ancients. You wake before dawn. The sky is still ink dark, and outside, the quiet hum of the modern world murmurs through wires, lights, and engines, the unseen pulse of electricity that powers every corner of life. But tonight a thought lingers like the last flicker of a dream. What if this energy, this invisible force, was not new at all? In the lore of the Tartarian Empire, it is said that the ancients knew how to draw power directly from the atmosphere, a pure, radiant energy that flowed freely through air and stone, unharnessed by fuel or flame. Those who tell this story call it etheric energy, or the energy of the ancients. You picture a city beneath the northern lights, towers of copper and glass rising into the night. The domes hum softly, the air faintly luminous, as if charged by the sky itself. There are no wires, no smoke, no fire. Only harmony, light drawn from air, motion born from balance. To some, this image is a fantasy, the echo of an age that never was. But to others, it is the memory of Tartaria's greatest gift and its greatest secret. The idea begins with architecture. Those same domes and spires that crown Tartarian buildings, believers say, were not decoration, but antennas designed to resonate with natural frequencies of the earth. The tall towers gathered energy from the sky, channeling it downward through conductive materials, copper roofs, metal rods, ornate finials. The entire building functioned as a kind of machine, a harmonic instrument tuned to the planet's electric field. You imagine walking through one of these cities. The marble streets glow faintly underfoot. The air hums like a distant chord. Fountains run without pumps. Lamps glow without oil. No soot, no ash, no noise. Just clean light and quiet power. In the 19th century, this idea of free energy began to flicker in real history. Names like Nikola Tesla, James Clerk Maxwell, and Michael Faraday appear in the pages of science. Tesla especially seems to stand like a bridge between myth and modernity. He dreamed of transmitting energy through the air, limitless, wireless, and free. His Wardenclyffe Tower rising in New York at the dawn of the 20th century looks strangely familiar to the believers of Tartaria. Its copper dome, its spiral coils, its towering height all echoed the old domes and spires they claimed once covered the empire's cities. To them, Tesla was not an inventor discovering something new, but a rediscoverer, a man touching again the lost thread of Tartarian technology. Historians, of course, disagree. Tesla's tower, they remind us, was a bold but unproven experiment never completed. His theories of wireless energy transmission were visionary but incomplete, overshadowed by the rise of industrial electricity, the era of wires, patents, and profit. Yet to those who dream of Tartaria, his work feels like the last flicker of an ancient understanding. The theory deepens further. Some claim that the World's Fairs of the 19th century, those grand expositions in Chicago, Paris, and St. Louis, were not just celebrations of progress, but rituals of rediscovery. The ornate temporary buildings built with domes, columns, and intricate metal crowns, they say, were not temporary at all. They were replications of Tartarian power structures built atop the buried remains of older energy grids, then quietly dismantled or destroyed when the fairs ended. You picture those exhibitions now, miles of glowing pavilions lit without visible wires, fountains that sprayed arcs of water illuminated by light unknown in their time. For the public, it was a vision of the future. For the believers, it was a glimpse of the past and the rebirth of a world that once understood the true nature of energy. But what exactly is this energy of the ancients? Those who study the myth speak of the ether, the subtle medium once believed to fill all space. Long before the modern idea of the vacuum, scientists and mystics alike thought the universe was woven from a luminous substance, invisible but real. It carried light, sound, and electricity. It was, they believed, the breath of creation itself. In the Tartarian worldview, this ether was not mythic, but practical. The great towers, the star forts, the domes, all were built in harmony with the flow of the ether. Their symmetry was not aesthetic, but functional, designed to create resonance between earth and sky. This, they say, was how Tartaria lit its cities, powered its fountains, and perhaps even levitated its monumental stones. You lean back, letting the thought ripple through your mind. Could it be true? Could the ancients have possessed a form of clean, limitless power, then lost it to time and conquest? Skeptics are quick to answer. There is no record, they insist, of such technology, no tools, no artifacts that suggest electrical mastery before the modern age. The energy theories of Tartaria are built on coincidence, not evidence, misinterpretations of architectural style and imagination woven into pseudoscience. Yet the idea endures not because of proof, but because of yearning. It speaks to a collective sense that somewhere in our past lies wisdom. We've forgotten that our ancestors might have understood harmony between technology and nature that we in our modern haste have lost. You think again of Tesla standing under his tower, lightning arcing through the night. He once wrote, "The day when we shall know exactly what electricity is will mark an epoch in human progress." Perhaps that day came once before, long ago, under the domes of Tartaria and slipped away with the silence of empires. As the dawn light seeps into your room, your thoughts drift between science and myth. Outside, the wires hum faintly with electricity, invisible, constant, harnessed by human hands. But for a moment, you imagine the air itself shimmering with quiet energy, as if the sky remembers what the earth has forgotten. You close your eyes. The hum deepens, becomes the breath of the world. And in that calm vibration, you feel it, the whisper of the ancients still alive in the currents around you. Not a machine, not a myth, but a memory. Mud flood. The day the world was buried. The rain outside your window has turned to a steady whisper. It seeps through the gutters and murmurs along the earth, a slow, endless tide of water and time. As you listen, the stories return, tales of cities buried not by centuries, but by a single terrible night. Those who speak of the Tartarian Empire tell of a cataclysm they call the mud flood, a world-spanning disaster that wiped away an entire civilization and hid its memory beneath layers of silt and soil. To most historians, it is a myth, an internet-born legend, a metaphor turned into conspiracy. But as the wind hums against the glass, you find yourself wondering, could the past have been buried, not destroyed? Could the world we walk upon be only the upper floor of a forgotten age? You picture a city, St. Petersburg perhaps, or Prague, or Istanbul. It is evening and the streets glow faintly under gaslight. The rain begins soft at first, then heavier, until water rushes through alleys, swirling around the foundations of buildings. People run for shelter. Then the earth trembles. The ground itself liquefies. Walls shudder, cobblestones vanish beneath a thick, heavy flood, not of water, but of mud. When morning comes, the city stands half buried. Doorways that once opened onto the street now lie beneath the ground. Windows sit at pavement level. The first floors of grand buildings disappear, leaving only upper stories to face the light. It is a haunting image, and for believers it is not fiction, but evidence hidden in plain sight. They point to old photographs from the 19th century workmen digging streets far below their present level. Buildings with half-buried doors and windows sealed by brick. Entire facades suggesting that the ground has risen inexplicably over time. How, they ask, did all these structures end up so far below street level? Did the architects truly build them that way? Historians have answers, of course. They speak of centuries of reconstruction, how cities grew upward, layer upon layer, through floods, fires, and time. Streets were raised foundations built over basements converted to shops. But for those who see Tartaria's shadow, the pattern is too vast, too uniform, too mysterious to dismiss. From Paris to St. Louis, from Moscow to Melbourne, they find the same signs, buried arches, half-hidden windows, columns that vanish into the earth. It is, they claim, the residue of a single global event, a deluge of mud that swallowed a civilization whole. You walk through one such city in your imagination now, the rain slick on cobblestones, the air thick with damp earth. You pass an old building where the main entrance lies several feet below the sidewalk, its doorway sealed long ago. In its stone, you feel the faint tremor of memory. Perhaps this wall once faced another street, a lower world now lost beneath our own. Believers say that the mud flood was not natural. They speak of it as a deliberate act or the tragic side effect of a war between powers long forgotten. Some suggest it was caused by a shift in energy fields, an atmospheric imbalance after the fall of Tartaria's great etheric technology. Others imagine volcanic storms, pole shifts, or the collapse of entire continents. What all the stories share is the image of sudden silence, a civilization buried alive beneath its own brilliance. In the archives of the 1800s, the believers find curious details. They note a strange calm in old records, as if the 18th century ended and the 19th began, with unexplained resets. Massive rebuilding projects occur worldwide. New governments rise seemingly overnight. Entire architectural styles, neoclassical, ornate, monumental, appear as though rediscovered rather than invented. Could this have been humanity reclaiming the ruins of Tartaria rather than creating something new? You think of the world's fairs again, those glittering expositions that rose and fell in the span of months. Believers claim that many of these grand cities, the White City of Chicago, the pavilions of St. Louis, the ornate halls of Paris, were not built from scratch, but unearthed, cleaned, and briefly displayed before being destroyed. Why, they ask, would anyone burn or demolish buildings of such splendor so soon after building them? Why not preserve them? Unless perhaps they were never truly new, but remnants of a world unearthed, polished, and then buried again. Skeptics counter with simpler truths. The mud flood, they say, is a misunderstanding, a poetic interpretation of ordinary decay and renewal. Cities are alive, they grow and rebuild. Floods, fires, and wars have buried countless structures through time. There is no need for a lost empire to explain what history already records. Yet even with logic, the feeling remains. There is something uncanny about a buried window, something mournful in a staircase that leads into earth instead of sky. When you walk an old street and feel the cobblestones dip beneath your feet, part of you wonders if you're walking above another world, a world that breathed once long ago. Perhaps that is why the mud flood myth endures. It speaks to a collective unease, a sense that our history may not be as linear as certain as we imagine. That beneath our cities lie older ones, beneath our stories, older truths. You lean closer to the rain-wet window pane, your reflection blurred by water. Outside, the world glistens in lamplight, bright on the surface, shadowed beneath. And you recall the words of an old architect who once said, "Every city is built on the ruins of its own memory." Maybe Tartaria is one such memory, buried not just under mud, but under centuries of forgetting. You close your eyes and see it, domes rising from the flood towers, gleaming through the silt, people climbing rooftops as the world sinks into silence. Then centuries later, explorers and masons digging foundations for new cities and striking the marble of an older one below. The wind sighs through the night, and for a moment the modern world feels fragile, thin as glass. Beneath it, you imagine a pulse, faint and buried but still alive. Perhaps the mud flood was not the end of the Tartarian Empire. Perhaps it was the curtain drawn across its stage, the final act of a play we've long forgotten, waiting to be uncovered once more. The Vanishing Empire. You wake in the quiet between night and dawn, that fragile hour when time itself feels uncertain, neither yesterday nor today. The air seems to hum faintly, as though the world remembers something it has not spoken aloud in centuries. You think again of Tartaria, that grand and ghostly empire, and of the question that lingers like smoke after fire. If it truly existed, how did it vanish so completely? Empires, after all, rarely disappear without a trace. Rome left roads and ruins, Egypt its pyramids, China its walls and records. Yet Tartaria, vast, radiant Tartaria, leaves only silence. No epic histories, no royal tombs, no chronicles of decline. Only faint references, old maps, and the shadows of memory scattered across the earth. The disappearance of Tartaria is the heart of the mystery. To some, it is evidence of deliberate erasure, the rewriting of world history by those who inherited its lands. To others, it is proof that Tartaria never existed beyond imagination, a name mistaken for empire. Between these extremes, a haunting idea emerges. Perhaps the truth lies hidden within both, that what was lost was not merely a nation, but an entire worldview. You picture a scholar in the late 18th century sitting by candlelight with an atlas spread before him. The word Tartary covers the northern half of Asia, but when he opens the latest edition, decades later, it's gone, replaced by Siberia, Central Asia, Russian Empire. The erasure happens quietly, without announcement. A few lines of ink, a few changes of borders, and an entire civilization vanishes from official history. No wars are recorded, no conquest chronicled, just absence. The believers say it was not natural. They whisper that the fall of Tartaria came not through invasion, but through assimilation, a slow, deliberate rewriting of the map. As new empires expanded, Russia from the west, Qing China from the east, Tartaria's territories were absorbed, its people renamed, its legacy forgotten. What could not be integrated was buried, destroyed, or explained away. Some go further still. They suggest a global event, perhaps the Great Mud Flood you've already imagined, left cities half buried, and that afterward, survivors rebuilt under new rulers who erased the past to claim its grandeur as their own. Others see in the 18th and 19th centuries a series of resets, mysterious fires, unexplained rebuilding, and a worldwide architectural renaissance too sudden to be natural. You think of the great fires that swept the world's cities during that age: London, Moscow, Chicago, San Francisco. Flames that erased old quarters, cleared space for new construction, often in the same grand styles. Was this coincidence? Or was it cleansing, the final act of a quiet conquest? Yet when you listen closely to the hum of history, another explanation stirs. Tartary as a name was never the creation of the people who lived there. It was a European invention, a word drawn by those who looked outward from their own maps of the world. For centuries, Tartary was simply the label for the vast unknown beyond the borders of knowledge, the steppe, the taiga, the desert, the mountains of the east. To the Russians, these lands were home to Cossacks, Bashkirs, and Tatars, fierce horsemen traders, farmers, shamans. To the Chinese, they were the northern tribes beyond the Great Wall. But to the cartographers of Amsterdam and Venice, it was simpler to draw a single word Tartaria across the page and let imagination fill in the rest. In time, as exploration advanced and borders became clearer, that word became unnecessary. It faded not through conspiracy, but through precision. When Siberia was mapped, Tartary no longer had a place. When Russia expanded eastward, it swallowed the name whole. But perhaps you think something deeper was lost in the process, not a political empire, but a sense of wonder, a belief in vastness and mystery. For early map makers, Tartaria was not just geography, it was possibility. It was the edge of the known world, the frontier of the imagination. And when modernity erased it, something within humanity's spirit narrowed too. Still, fragments remain faint, scattered, stubborn. In Central Asian folklore, there are tales of a northern king who ruled lands of perpetual light. In Siberia, the Evenki people tell of ancient builders who crafted towers that sang in the wind. In Tibetan scrolls, travelers wrote of shining cities far to the northwest, swallowed by earth long ago. Could these be cultural memories, threads of an old tapestry unraveling through time? Or do they speak of a lost age whose stories survived only as legend? You walk through a museum in your imagination. Behind glass artifacts gleam bronze astrolabes, silver icons, fragments of embroidered silk. The plaques name them as Mongol, Russian, Turkic, Chinese. Yet part of you wonders if these were once the possessions of a people who called themselves something else entirely, a name erased before it could be recorded. The believers call Tartaria the Empire of Memory. They say it lives not in books, but in the bones of our cities, the symmetry of old stone, the names we no longer question. It hides in plain sight in the rhythm of domes, in the buried doorways, in the very air we breathe. To skeptics, this is the poetry of wishful thinking. History, they remind us, is written by those who record it, not those who dream it. The Tartarian narrative, they say, is a reflection of our longing for lost order, a myth born from nostalgia for an age of beauty, balance, and meaning. And yet myths often hold truths that facts overlook. Perhaps the vanishing of Tartaria is not about a lost empire at all, but about the nature of history itself. How easily we forget, how swiftly names change, how silently the past can disappear when no one is left to remember. The clock ticks softly in the dark. You close your eyes and picture the old maps again, the word Tartaria stretched across the roof of the world. Then as dawn glows pale behind the mountains of ink, the letters fade, replaced by others, sharper, colder. The empire is gone. The silence remains. But in that silence, you hear a whisper, "We were here." And for a moment, you believe them. Echoes in the Chronicles. The night feels older than usual, its silence dense as parchment. You sit beside the dim glow of your lamp, surrounded by the soft rustle of old pages, travel journals, missionary reports, and encyclopedias that have outlived their authors. Across the faded ink and curling paper, one word returns again and again, like a half-forgotten refrain: Tartary. Not the Tartary of maps this time, but of words of chronicles and correspondence that speak of lands, kings, and peoples whose names history has since blurred. You trace the letters with your fingertip, following them through centuries of curiosity and confusion, each record another echo in the long corridor of time. You begin with the Jesuit missionaries of the 17th century, men who crossed frozen rivers and endless grasslands in their search for souls and science. Their letters describe the Great Tartary as a world of contradictions, wild yet civilized, vast yet ordered, cruel yet strangely devout. One priest writing from Beijing mentions Tartarian princes who rule with fairness and skill, skilled in astronomy and architecture. Another traveling through Siberia speaks of stone cities that glitter beneath the northern sun. His words tremble with awe, not derision. Were they describing fragments of an empire already fading, or were they simply dressing the unknown in the robes of legend? You open another book, an encyclopedia from 1771, published in Edinburgh, its pages yellow and brittle. There it is, printed plainly: Tartary, a vast country in the northern parts of Asia, bounded by Siberia on the north, by China on the south, and by the Caspian Sea on the west. It goes on to list regions: Great Tartary, Little Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Independent Tartary. There is no hesitation in its tone, no suggestion of myth. The entry reads as confidently as one might describe France or Persia, and yet in the next century the name vanishes. The new encyclopedias of the industrial age omit it entirely. No empire, no capital, no kings. The silence between those two books feels like a century of forgetting, or perhaps deliberate rewriting. You imagine the editors at their desks surrounded by globes and atlases. One asks, "Shall we include Tartary?" Another shakes his head. "Outdated," he says, "a cartographer's fiction," and with that a continent-sized word disappears. But the older accounts still speak, their voices faint yet insistent. The Venetian traveler Marco Polo, whose journey through Asia filled European minds with wonder, never called his route Tartary. Yet his tales of Cathay and the Great Khan's court paint a picture eerily similar: cities of splendor, administrative sophistication, wealth beyond comprehension. Later chroniclers, unable to reconcile his stories with known lands, place them under the same grand name, Tartaria. Then there are the Russian explorers of the 16th and 17th centuries, men like Yermak, who pushed eastward through the Urals, conquering river by river, forest by forest. Their diaries tell of fortresses already standing, of towns that seemed ancient yet strangely advanced. Were these remnants of Tartarian strongholds, or the ruins of Mongol forts absorbed into Russian legend? In some letters, the name Tartary is written with reverence, in others with dread. The etymology itself wavers between Tatar, meaning one of the steppe peoples, and Tartarus, the infernal pit of Greek myth. To medieval Europeans, the word evoked both danger and divinity, a land where giants might dwell, or angels fallen from heaven. Even the early English poets borrowed the name for its music. They wrote of Tartarian steeds and Tartarian kings of jewels from Tartary, and tempests that roll from its plains. To them it was shorthand for something vast, untamed, and eternal, a word that belonged more to myth than map, and yet somehow contained both. You pause, staring at one phrase in an 18th century traveler's log. The Tartars build in stone and metal, yet claim no ownership for the land itself as their father. The sentence feels ancient, almost spiritual. If Tartaria existed, perhaps its strength was not in empire, but in philosophy, a culture that saw power not as possession, but as harmony with nature. The believers who speak of Tartaria today often point to these fragments as proof, the scattered words of witnesses who saw more than they understood. The skeptics, of course, have their answer ready. These were travelers, they say, not scholars. Their observations blurred reality and wonder. The Tartars they met were diverse peoples of the steppes, each with their own traditions, languages, and rulers. Europe's confusion turned plurality into singularity, and thus Tartary was born. But even if misunderstanding created the name, it cannot erase the pattern that threads through these accounts. Again and again across centuries, witnesses describe the same things: cities of grandeur, technological marvels, knowledge of the stars' towers that hum with strange power. Perhaps these were exaggerations, perhaps not. You turn another page. The ink has faded, but the handwriting remains elegant. The writer describes a meeting with a group of horsemen from the great north who carry instruments of bronze and glass and speak of a city built by the people who spoke to the wind. The phrase lingers in your thoughts. What does it mean to speak to the wind, to communicate with forces unseen, as if nature itself were a language? Maybe Tartaria was never an empire in the political sense. Maybe it was a civilization defined by understanding, not conquest, a lineage of builders, engineers, and sages who lived in resonance with the earth. If so, its disappearance might not be a single event, but a slow fading, a transition from visibility to myth. You close the book gently. The room feels heavier now, filled with the weight of unspoken history. Outside, the world sleeps beneath layers of time asphalt over cobblestone concrete over clay. Beneath it all, the ground remembers. Perhaps that is why these old chronicles stir something deep within us. They remind us that our modern certainty stands atop a fragile foundation of forgotten stories, that between fact and imagination lies a thin line, and ancient one on that line walks Tartaria, whispering from the pages of old travelers' tales. You reach for another book, but stop halfway, listening instead to the faint ticking of the clock. The sound is steady, ancient, patient, like history itself. And as your eyes grow heavy, the words on the last open page seem to shimmer softly in the light. They called it Tartary. We called it home. Tsars, nomads, and empire builders. The morning light creeps across a map spread open on your desk. The inked borders glisten faintly, nations drawn by human hands on a world that once had none. You trace your finger eastward across forests, rivers, deserts until it reaches the edge of the steppe, that endless ocean of grass. It was here history tells us that the so-called Tartarian world met its end, or perhaps its transformation. This is a story that the historians know: the Russian Empire expanding from the west, the Qing dynasty pressing from the east, and between them, the nomadic realms of Central Asia, the Kazakhs, the Oirats, the Uzbeks, the Buryats, the Mongols. Yet to those who speak of Tartaria, this convergence was not the beginning of history, but the unraveling of something older. You close your eyes and the centuries blur. The steppe comes alive. Herds move like waves across the land. The sky stretches unbroken, its blue, so deep it seems eternal. Nomads ride through the tall grass, their faces bronzed by wind, their eyes clear, their banners fluttering with sun symbols and eagles. They live not in cities, but in rhythms, migration, trade, diplomacy, war. To them, empire is not a palace, but a horizon. And yet scattered through these lands are monuments, fortresses of stone towers that glint beneath the snow-water channels that curve with mathematical grace. Who built them? Russian explorers in the 16th and 17th centuries were astonished to find cities already standing beyond the Urals, Tobolsk, Taratom settlements, so ordered, so symmetrical, they seemed too sophisticated for frontier outposts. When they asked the locals who had built them, the answers varied: the old people, the builders before us, those who vanished when the rivers changed. The believers in Tartaria claim that these were the final colonies of a once united northern empire, later absorbed by Moscow and renamed as its own. The Tsars, they say, did not build upon empty land, they inherited it. You picture Peter the Great standing in the marshes beside the Baltic, envisioning St. Petersburg. The official story calls it his masterpiece, a new window to the west carved from swamp by human will. But others whisper that Peter merely unearthed it, that the grand palaces and canals were already there, buried in mud after the Great Flood, and that his architects restored what had once been Tartarian. To the official record, this is nonsense, and the Tsar's city, they say, was built by tens of thousands of laborers, brick by brick, stone by stone. Yet the timeline bewilders even the most patient reader. Within a few short decades, a monumental city arises with cathedrals, marble keys, and gilded domes so refined they seem to belong to an older age. Could it be that Russia's new capital was a resurrection rather than a creation? As the empire of the Tsars grew, it absorbed the lands once labeled Tartary on European maps. The steppes of the Kazakhs, the mountains of the Altai, the tundra of Yakutia, all became part of a single imperial design. The people who had once been called Tartars were now subjects of the Tsar, their histories rewritten under new flags. But while official history speaks of conquest and colonization, the mythic version speaks of inheritance and concealment. Believers point to the seamless way these lands integrated into the empire: the pre-existing roads, the fortresses ready for garrisons, the knowledge of local astronomy and metallurgy that Russian explorers seem merely to rediscover. Could this ease of expansion suggest not a new conquest, but the reclaiming of an older dominion, one whose name had been erased even as its foundations endured. And in the east, another power was rising, the Qing dynasty of China. Under emperors like Kangxi and Qianlong, the Qing court extended its reach into Mongolia, Tibet, and Xinjiang, the very heartlands once called Chinese Tartary. The Manchu rulers documented their expeditions with obsessive care maps, paintings, surveys, and archives. Yet curiously, these records speak of ancient fortifications and cities already standing in the deserts and mountains, their origins unrecorded. The believers claim that the Qing too were heirs to Tartaria, or perhaps rivals who conquered what remained of it. They note that Chinese scholars of the time wrote of the old builders of the north and of star-shaped fortresses that predated the Manchu conquests. You imagine a caravan of emissaries traveling between Moscow and Beijing through the frozen passes of Central Asia. Their letters, if any survived, might speak of shared wonders, architecture too advanced for nomads, symbols carved in stone that neither empire could explain. By the 19th century, the transformation is complete. Tartary, once drawn across the maps of Europe, has been divided into precise imperial zones. The north belongs to Russia, the south to China, the center to khanates under protectorates and treaties. The old name fades, the old identity dissolves. To historians, this is the march of progress. To the dreamers of Tartaria, it is the final conquest, not of armies, but of memory. They say that the Tsars and the emperors did not merely seize land. They seized history itself, rewriting the narrative of civilization to begin anew under their banners. The cathedrals became Russian, the observatories became Chinese. The old energy towers became church steeples or pagodas. The world that once called itself Tartaria was folded neatly into the empires that followed its name, reduced to a curiosity on obsolete maps. And yet the traces remain. The languages of the steppe still carry echoes, words shared across impossible distances, like fragments of a forgotten mother tongue. The embroidery of nomadic coats repeats the same spirals that decorate ancient stone walls in Samarkand and Kazan. Even the music, the throat singing of the Altai, the chants of Siberia hums in tones that seem to vibrate with the memory of something vast and unseen. You lean back, letting the map blur before your eyes. Perhaps what we call Tartaria was never a single empire, but a continuum, generations of builders and riders, kings and nomads who moved with the rhythm of the steppe, passing knowledge like a flame. And when the czars and emperors arrived, that flame was not extinguished, but hidden, its light absorbed into new empires, its name dissolved into silence. Outside, the evening returns. The world feels still again, but in that stillness you hear it, a low hum, a heartbeat in the wind. The same pulse that carried across the steppes centuries ago. Perhaps Tartaria did not vanish. Perhaps it simply changed its name. Fire and Steel, the industrial rewrite. The age of the horse fades. The age of steam begins. You stand on the platform of a 19th century city, soot-filled air. The shriek of iron wheels, smoke curling like ghosts above the rooftops. Everywhere the world is being rebuilt. Old streets vanish under cobblestones. Spires give way to smokestacks. Stone gives way to steel. And beneath the noise, beneath the triumph of progress, something older sinks quietly into the shadows. To most, this century marks the dawn of modern civilization, the Industrial Revolution, a time when humanity learned to harness fire, metal, and motion. But to those who follow the story of the Tartarian Empire, it is something else entirely, the rewriting of the world. They call it the Great Erasure by Fire and Steel. Factories rise where palaces once stood. Great fires sweep through city after city: London in 1666, Moscow in 1812, Chicago in 1871, San Francisco in 1906. Each blaze is followed by massive reconstruction, and the new buildings that appear are often strangely familiar neoclassical facades, grand domes, colonnades, echoing the architecture of an older vanished order. The skeptics see coincidence. The believers see cleansing a systematic replacement of Tartarian cities with a world rebranded as modern. You walk through one such reconstruction in your mind. Chicago, 1893. The world's Columbian exposition known as the White City rises from the ashes of the Great Fire just 2 decades earlier. Miles of brilliant architecture appear as if overnight vast halls, crowned with domes, ornamented columns, grand canals, reflecting electric light. The visitors gasp at the spectacle. They call it a miracle of engineering. Yet to those who whisper the name Tartaria, this fair is not a creation, but a revelation. Look closely, they say these were not new buildings, that they were rediscovered. The Expositions architects, according to believers, did not design but restore. They unearthed old foundations, cleared mud-polished stone, and called it progress. When the fair ends, almost all of it is destroyed, burned, dismantled, or buried again. The explanation given is practical cost, temporary design, fire hazard. But for the dreamers, it feels deliberate, a second burial of an empire too magnificent to fit the new narrative of industry. You imagine the scene, the glow of electric bulbs, thousands of them, bathing white facades in light brighter than the moon. The people below gasp. For them, this is the future. But in the eyes of a few, it is the past reborn. The same pattern unfolds across continents. Paris builds its Exposition Universelle in 1889, a fair so vast it seems like a city unto itself. Vienna, St. Louis, Philadelphia, Sydney all follow suit. Great pavilions rise in harmony with Tartarian geometry. Symmetry domes towers with metallic spires. Then within years they vanish, leaving behind photographs, postcards, and silence. The believers point to the speed of these constructions. Monumental complexes supposedly built in months with technology barely capable of producing such precision. They ask, how did 19th century laborers working by hand create these cathedrals of plaster and steel so perfectly, so fast, only to destroy them again? Skeptics answer with reason, prefabrication, plaster facades, human ingenuity, the optimism of an age. Yet reason cannot quiet the unease of those who see in this century not invention, but recovery, humanity, rediscovering fragments of a brilliance it once possessed and then forgot. You recall the Exposition of St. Louis, 1904, its palaces reflecting in calm water, statues of winged figures standing before copper domes. When the fair closed, the buildings were burned in inferno of art and marble, their ashes scattered by wind. One journalist wrote, "The city is gone. It is as if it never was." Those words linger, as if it never was. In the Tartarian narrative, the Industrial Revolution marks the final transformation. The world that followed was no longer built to endure, but to consume. The age of harmony gave way to the age of progress. Beauty became a byproduct of utility, and the grand architecture that once mirrored the stars was replaced by grid smoke and motion. The factories hummed and the memory of Tartaria faded beneath the din. Still, not everything was lost. In the new machines and the genius of inventors like Tesla, Kelvin, and Edison, the believers see the flickering survival of Tartarian science, misunderstood, misapplied, but not extinguished. Tesla especially becomes a symbol, a man who dreamed of free energy, wireless transmission, and resonance, the same concepts said to power the towers of the old empire. When he spoke of the earth as a conductor of the air, as a living current, the myth makers nodded knowingly. He remembers, they whispered, he has touched the old knowledge. But Tesla's tower falls. The financiers withdraw. The dream is buried beneath the same tide of industrial capitalism that replaces marble with brick and beauty with profit. To the believers, it is not failure, it is suppression, a continuation of the same silencing that erased Tartaria centuries before. And what of the fires, those endless convenient flames? The Great Fire of Moscow, 1812, destroys two-thirds of the city. Rebuilt within a generation, it emerges grander, its domes brighter, its symmetry eerily reminiscent of those Tartarian blueprints said to once define the empire's aesthetic. The Great Fire of Chicago, 1871, levels the city in days. Yet when rebuilt, Chicago gleams with white stone-wide avenues, monumental design, as if memory itself guided the masons. Again and again, destruction and rebirth, as though the world were cleansing itself or being rewritten. You can almost hear it, the whisper and the roar of progress. Forget the old, build anew. Do not ask what stood here before. And so humanity steps into the modern age. Factories churn locomotives, thunder cities glow with light. The old world is gone, and with it, perhaps the last traces of Tartaria. But deep beneath the streets, under layers of brick and soot, lie the forgotten levels, sealed doors, buried arches, windows, staring into soil. The mud and time have done their work. The past is hidden yet not erased. Perhaps you think the Industrial Revolution was not the birth of something new, but the final breath of something old, the last exhale of an age when beauty and power walked hand in hand. The trains whistle in the distance. Sparks shower from the furnaces. The night smells of metal and rain. And somewhere beneath the clang of hammers, you imagine the earth sighing a faint ancient hum beneath the steel. It is the sound of an empire sleeping. And perhaps one day it will wake. The expositions of a hidden age. The world gleams white beneath a summer sun. Flags flutter. Brass bands play. Crowds gather by the thousands, their faces upturned toward towers, domes, and fountains so grand they seem born of another world. You stand among them now, a visitor at one of the great world's fairs of the 19th century. The banners read Progress, Industry, Civilization. But as you wander the marble avenues past palaces of glass and gilded stone, you feel something strange. These buildings do not look new. They look remembered. This is the paradox that lives at the heart of the Tartarian legend, that the expositions of the modern age were not monuments to invention, but eulogies for a forgotten civilization. To believers, they were windows into the world that came before the rewrite. You picture the most famous of them all, the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago. 40 kilometers of avenues, canals, and pavilions. Over 200 buildings in blinding white crowned with domes, arches, and towers. At night, electric light spills across the water, reflecting the facades in golden symmetry. Visitors call it the White City. They walk in awe, whispering that it feels like a dream, a place between heaven and earth. The official story says these buildings were temporarily constructed of wooden plaster for a single-year celebration, then torn down or burned after the fair's close. Yet as you look closer, the details seem too perfect: massive staircases, carved pillars, intricate reliefs, marble floors that no one would see again after a single season. Believers ask the same question: who builds cathedrals for a year? They claim the expositions were not new creations, but restorations unearthed and repainted ruins of Tartarian cities rediscovered beneath the modern world. The temporary materials were disguises, excuses for why such grandeur appeared and vanished so quickly. The fairs, they say, were exhibitions of the old world, proof paraded briefly before the public, then destroyed to preserve the illusion of progress. You drift through the Chicago Fair in your imagination. You hear the murmur of fountains, the laughter of crowds, the distant hiss of the first electric lights. At the heart of it all rises the administration building, crowned with a golden dome that glows like the sun. Inside, columns stretch upward in endless rows. The air smells of ozone and polished stone. Could this have been a remnant of Tartaria, a surviving monument to an empire of harmony and energy? You remember the words of an architect who attended the fair. He wrote, "We are not building something new. We are awakening something that has been asleep." It is easy in that moment to believe him. The same pattern repeats across the world. In Paris, 1889, the Exposition Universelle dazzles the world with palaces of glass and iron fountains that shimmer with colored light, and a tower of steel so tall it touches the clouds, the Eiffel Tower, a symbol of human triumph. But for the believers, that tower is not the future. It is a relic, a fragment of an older technology, a massive resonator that once captured and transmitted atmospheric power. In St. Louis, 1904, pavilions stretched for miles, domes of white and gold statues of winged figures, waterways lined with glowing arches. The fair closes and fire consumes it just as in Chicago. Only a few buildings survive, quietly rebranded as museums and universities. Each fair, each temporary city becomes a flicker of revelation, a brief resurfacing of a civilization that refuses to stay buried. But skeptics too have their stories. They say the expositions were simply the manifestations of industrial ambition, a demonstration of what human ingenuity could achieve when united by pride and profit. Cheap materials, plaster and iron made them possible, and the fires that followed were accidents of time and neglect. They remind us that progress always leaves ruins. And yet, as you study the photographs, black and white images of shining cities that no longer exist, something stirs in you. The symmetry, the impossible scale, the fusion of art and mathematics. It feels older than industry, older even than empire. It feels remembered. You imagine walking these avenues at dusk when the lamps flicker to life. The crowds thin, the music fades, and the architecture seems to breathe, the domes glowing softly, the towers humming with the echo of unseen forces. The city feels alive. Perhaps the expositions were more than monuments or myths. Perhaps they were rites of remembrance, moments when humanity subconsciously reconnected with a buried past, the same way a melody half forgotten might return in dreams. In that sense, the white cities of the world were not illusions at all, but mirrors reflecting what we once were or what we still hope to be. One historian writing decades later called these fairs the most beautiful lie ever built. But maybe beauty in this case is the point, because Tartaria, whether it was an empire, a myth, or both, endures not through proof but through feeling. The sense that something vast and harmonious once existed, that our cities once sang in tune with the earth, that knowledge and beauty were once the same. And for a few shining months in each of those fairs that feeling returned. When the fires came, the world called it inevitable progress, making room for practicality. But for those who stand in the quiet of museums today, staring at the photographs of the vanished white city, the loss feels deliberate. It is said that the fair-goers wept as the flames consumed the domes, as statues cracked in the heat, as the palaces turned to smoke. One journalist wrote, "It was as if an entire civilization had risen, lived, and perished in a single breath." Perhaps that is exactly what happened. For one breath, the old world came back. The domes, the symmetry, the resonance, Tartaria reappeared under the guise of progress. And then, as always, it was gone. The smoke drifts upward, vanishing into the night. The lights go out, the music ends. And somewhere deep in the earth, the hum of that forgotten empire continues, faint but steady, waiting for the world to listen again. Forgotten technologies and star forts. You stand on a hill at dawn. Below you lies a shape carved into the earth, vast, geometric, breathtaking in its precision. From above it looks like a flower of stone, a perfect star of walls and moats and bastions, radiating outward in flawless symmetry. The locals call it a fortress. The maps call it a relic of war. But to the dreamers of Tartaria, it is something else, a machine not for battle but for balance. These are the star forts scattered across continents, identical in design, mysterious in origin. From Italy to India, from Siberia to the Americas, they rise in silence, their purpose half forgotten, their beauty undeniable. You trace their pattern on a map: Nova Scotia, Verona, St. Petersburg, Goa, Cartagena, Astrakhan. The same radiant geometry repeats across oceans and empires, centuries apart, as if one invisible hand once drew them all. Historians will tell you that these forts belong to the age of gunpowder, the 15th to 18th centuries, when military engineers devised complex shapes to deflect cannon fire and cover blind spots. But believers in the Tartarian legacy see more. They see the traces of a universal science and understanding of resonance, magnetism, and energy flow technologies now lost, buried under the vocabulary of war. You imagine one as it once might have been: towers topped with shining domes, walls lined with conductive metals, underground channels humming faintly with power. From above, sunlight glints on golden ornaments that seem almost designed to catch not light but energy. The air hums. The city within pulses like a living circuit. Could it be that these structures once harnessed the Earth's electromagnetic field, converting energy from the planet itself, just as modern scientists still dream to do? The believers call it geo-resonant architecture. They say the star forts were not defenses at all, but stabilizers built at ley line intersections. Those mythical currents of energy that weave through the world. The design, they claim, amplified harmony, maintaining balance in the environment, and perhaps even influencing weather, health, and consciousness. To skeptics, this is poetic nonsense. To dreamers, it's the whisper of a truth too ancient to measure. You picture the builders' engineers of another age aligning foundations, with the stars embedding metals and crystals into the walls, tuning angles to sacred geometry. The design, they believe, mirrored the heavens, as above, so below. Each fort, they say, was not merely architecture, but instrument. And like all instruments, they could be silenced. When the world changed, when gunpowder and empire rewrote the past, the knowledge of how to tune these structures faded. The harmonies broke. What remained were empty shells, later repurposed as military strongholds, prisons, and museums. Even now, some of these forts produce strange phenomena. Compass needles spin at their centers. Plants grow in patterns around their walls. Birds avoid their moats, flying in wide arcs, as if following unseen boundaries. Are these coincidences or faint echoes of a forgotten system still alive beneath the surface? You walk the ramparts in your imagination. The walls are cool to the touch, the angles disorienting. Every line seems to draw your gaze outward toward infinity. The symmetry feels less defensive and more meditative, as if the structure were designed not to repel enemies, but to focus the mind. Perhaps that is the real secret of Tartaria's technology, not domination, but attunement. The ability to shape material in such harmony with the earth that energy flowed through it, naturally effortless, silent, self-sustaining. The believers find more evidence in the relics of the 19th century. The massive bells, the pipe organs, the towers with globes and rods atop them. Were these merely instruments and decorations or devices for channeling vibration and frequency, relics of an older science disguised as art? You think of the great cathedrals of Europe, whose acoustics seem almost superhuman, sound waves lingering in the air, resonating as though the very stones sing. It is said that when the choirs of the Middle Ages performed some frequencies, caused the stained glass to shimmer, the air itself to vibrate. The believers say this, too, was no accident. The Tartarian builders, they claim, understood sound as energy, a bridge between the material and the divine. And if sound could shape stone, perhaps thought could shape reality. It is here that the myth grows subtler, more beautiful. The idea that Tartaria's greatest technology was not mechanical but spiritual, that its people knew how to blend matter and consciousness, architecture and vibration, so that the world itself became a living temple. The skeptics smile at this, but the poets listen. Because even if the literal truth is uncertain, the metaphor feels powerful. That once upon a time, humanity built not only with hands, but with harmony. You look again at those star forts from above, perfect, enduring, mathematical. Centuries of war and weather have scarred their walls, yet the pattern remains untouched. Nature herself seems to preserve them, as though aware of their meaning. And what of the other technologies said to belong to Tartaria, the atmospheric energy towers, the magnetized domes, the etheric conductors disguised as spires? In city after city, believers find clues, metal-tipped towers on 18th century buildings, golden globes antennas before electricity was invented. Were these merely decoration or remnants of a time when humans drew power from the sky itself? History says no. The designs were aesthetic, symbolic, or practical. But still the pattern repeats across cultures, across continents. The domes of Russia, the minarets of Persia, the clock towers of Europe, the pagodas of Asia all rise with the same geometry, as if answering an ancient rhythm. And that rhythm hums still if you listen closely enough. You close your eyes. The wind carries a low note like the faint ring of a bell. In your mind, the star fort beneath you glows softly, each wall a petal of energy, each corridor a vein of light. It is not a fortress at all, but a memory of equilibrium, a reminder that there was once a time when human creation served harmony, not haste. The sun crests the horizon. The light catches on the fortress walls, and for a moment they shine gold just as they might have centuries ago, when the world was tuned differently and the cities of Tartaria hummed with power drawn not from fire or wire, but from the living sky. Perhaps those frequencies still linger too faint for our machines, but not for our dreams. You take a slow breath. The wind passes through the ruins and the echo that follows sounds almost like music. Between myth and memory, the night is calm, the stars suspended like ancient lamps. You sit in the quiet glow of your own lamp pages spread before you, surrounded by fragments, maps, sketches, theories, stories. Tartaria flickers in each of them like a phantom flame, sometimes brilliant, sometimes barely there. And as you read, one question begins to take shape, not whether it was real, but why it still matters. This is a space between myth and memory where belief and evidence share the same twilight. It is here, perhaps, that Tartaria truly lives. You begin with what is known. History tells us that there was no single Tartarian empire, only vast shifting territories of Central and Northern Asia, home to nomads, conquerors, and merchants. The Mongols, the Turks, the Uzbeks, the Russians all left their mark. The word Tartary was in its time a convenient label for the unexplored, a way for Europeans to name the unknown. And yet the traces are too poetic to dismiss as ignorance alone. Old maps label entire continents with confidence showing Great Tartary, Independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary. Ancient books describe great cities and kingdoms whose names no longer appear on any globe. They speak of towers of symmetry of power drawn from the air and the stars. Were these the embellishments of travelers, the dreams of merchants, the echoes of misunderstood cultures, or the remnants of an erased reality? You turn a page and find an illustration, a cathedral with domes like teardrops of fire lightning rods gleaming atop spires. The caption reads simply, Architectura Tartarica 1712, no explanation, no coordinates. Just a phrase that hints at something larger. It is at moments like this that the believers lean forward. They see not coincidence, but pattern. They argue that the past we call recorded is itself selective, curated by victors, filtered through institutions, rewritten to fit the story of progress. To them, Tartaria's absence from textbooks is not evidence of fantasy, but proof of redaction. And indeed, history is full of silences. Great cities have vanished before, civilizations erased by flood fire, or the rewriting of dynasties. From Carthage to Mohenjo-Daro, entire cultures once thrived only to dissolve into dust and rumor. Could Tartaria be another of these not imaginary but simply inconvenient? The skeptics reply gently, almost patiently. They remind us that the evidence must come first, artifacts, inscriptions, bones, datable ruins. Without them, the empire remains a story. They point out that the mud flood photographs the buried windows. The star forts all have rational explanations. Changes in terrain, architectural trends, the natural evolution of design. The grandeur of 18th and 19th century architecture, they say, reflects not an ancient empire, but the optimism of human hands learning to build anew. And yet, there is something haunting about how all these threads weave together. The old maps, the architecture, the symmetry, the buried cities, like the bones of a forgotten body beneath the surface of time. Even if Tartaria never existed as an empire, perhaps the idea of it points to something real, a memory of order, a longing for harmony lost in the noise of modernity. You lean back and your mind drifts. Imagine that Tartaria was never a nation, but a knowledge system, a worldview that united art, science, and spirit. Imagine a civilization that built with resonance, that saw energy not as something to exploit, but to align with. A people who believed that beauty itself was a technology, that geometry could heal, that the world was alive. Would that not explain why their monuments, real or imagined, still touch something deep within us? The line between myth and memory blurs easily because both grow from the same soil human yearning. Myths are the stories we tell to remember what facts have forgotten. Perhaps Tartaria is not a deception, but a mirror reflecting our hunger for lost wisdom, our suspicion that progress might have come with a price. For the skeptics, this myth is harmless curiosity. For the believers, it is revelation. But for those who stand between, who neither dismiss nor surrender, Tartaria becomes something more subtle, a meditation on how history is written and by whom. You think of the Library of Alexandria burned by wars and time, of the Mayan codices destroyed by missionaries, of knowledge deliberately buried for reasons of power. It is not hard to believe that truths, inconvenient, destabilizing truths, could vanish in the same way. The believers in Tartaria sense this deeply. They are not only defending a lost civilization, they are defending the idea that the past is not closed, that discovery is still possible, that wonder is not naive. There's beauty in that defiance, a kind of faith in imagination. And maybe that is the true inheritance of Tartaria, not maps or monuments, but the will to question. You close the last book and glance at the map once more. The name Tartary glows faintly under the lamplight, letters faded but not gone. For a moment you see it not as territory but as metaphor. A vast, undefined expanse where the boundaries between fact and feeling dissolve. Outside, a wind stirs the trees. Their branches sway like compass needles, tracing invisible lines through the air. The world hums softly, the same sound you've felt before, the same vibration between certainty and mystery. You realize perhaps for the first time that it doesn't matter whether Tartaria was or wasn't. What matters is why so many people still dream of it, an empire of balanced beauty and forgotten brilliance. In that dream, the modern world finds a reflection of its own longing for coherence, for meaning, for a time when we built cathedrals instead of factories, when technology served grace rather than greed. Maybe that is why Tartaria refuses to die. It lives wherever people look at an old building, a buried window, or a star-shaped city and whisper, there was something before us, something grander. And in that whisper, myth and memory meet, neither false nor true but alive. The lamp flickers, the map grows dim. You listen to the hum of the night and think perhaps we are not meant to solve Tartaria's mystery. Perhaps we are meant to remember the feeling of its possibility. For in that feeling, that blend of awe, curiosity, and reverence, lies the truest legacy of all lost worlds. The digital revival. The hum of the present replaces the whisper of parchment. Screens glow where candlelight once flickered, and in the infinite maze of the digital age, across message boards, forums, and videos, the old name has returned. Tartaria. You sit before the light of your own screen now, and as you scroll, the past reawakens in pixels. Maps, photographs, diagrams, all stitched together by voices across continents. Some speak with certainty, others with wonder, but all are drawn by the same gravity, the mystery that refuses to die. This is the digital rebirth of Tartaria, not in ruins or relics, but in imagination. It began quietly in the corners of the internet. A few researchers comparing antique maps noticed the same word, repeated: Tartary, Tartaria, Grand Tartary. Soon, old encyclopedias resurfaced in scanned pages, maps uploaded from forgotten archives, travelers' journals, digitized and shared. The past, once locked in libraries, became alive again, accessible to anyone with curiosity and a connection. And curiosity spread like wildfire. Online communities began to grow, thousands of people gathering to discuss the Tartarian Empire, its architecture, its supposed technologies, its erasure. Some analyze photographs of 19th century cities, noting the strange depth of buried doors, the inexplicable size of old buildings, the recurrence of domes and towers. Others compare World's Fair blueprints, fire records, and historical timelines, seeking patterns that traditional history seemed to ignore. A new kind of archaeology was born, the archaeology of the imagination. You scroll through their work, detailed threads linking star forts to sacred geometry, side-by-side photos of cathedrals and energy towers, maps layered with ley lines. The tone is reverent, almost devotional. The believers speak not just of buildings and mud floods, but of meaning of a lost harmony between humanity and the earth. Their words echo something older than fact, a longing for coherence. Perhaps that is why Tartaria's digital revival found such fertile ground in the modern world, a world defined by fragmentation, by mistrust, by the feeling that truth itself has splintered. Amid that noise, the myth of Tartaria offers a kind of order, a secret history that makes sense of chaos. Here in these digital halls, Tartaria becomes a cathedral of collective imagination. You see it everywhere now on streaming platforms, podcasts, documentaries. Some treat it as curiosity, others as revelation. Artists paint imagined Tartarian cities glowing under auroras. Musicians compose resonance frequencies inspired by its supposed technologies. Architects study its proportions. Historians, reluctantly or not, begin to respond. The debate becomes its own living myth. To the skeptics, this revival is the perfect example of conspiratorial nostalgia, a desire to rewrite history to comfort the uncertainties of the present. They point out that the internet is fertile ground for false connections, where coincidence looks like pattern and imagination masquerades as evidence. But even they must admit Tartaria's endurance is remarkable. For an empire that supposedly never existed, it has achieved what few historical topics ever could: global fascination. In that fascination lies something deeply human. You think of a comment you once read online, written beneath an image of an old fortress. I don't care if it's real or not. When I look at it, I remember something I've never seen. That line lingers. It captures the essence of this revival, not a search for documents, but a search for resonance. People aren't just looking for proof, they're looking for belonging to a world that once felt purposeful, sacred, and beautifully made. In that sense, Tartary has become the myth of modernity's discontent, a mirror reflecting what we've lost in our pursuit of progress, awe, craftsmanship, meaning. You think back to the grand expositions of the 19th century, those white cities of light and symmetry. Today, their images circulate online, captioned with questions and wonder. How did they build this? Why did they destroy it? Who were the real architects? For some, these questions are the doorway to revelation. For others, to delusion. But either way, the door stands open, and behind it, the collective imagination hums like the old towers once said to hum with energy. The digital age, for all its noise, has become a new library of Alexandria, built not of stone but of shared minds. And within it, Tartaria rises once more reconstructed, not from ruins but from longing. You scroll further, and amid the diagrams and debates, you find something quieter: essays, poems, meditations. People writing not about machines or floods, but about what Tartaria means. They speak of unity between art and science, of architecture that heals, of a world that builds with reverence instead of haste. Perhaps you think this is the true heart of the legend, not an empire of brick and stone, but a symbol of integration, a memory of when knowledge and beauty were not separate things. The believers share images of domes glowing under dawn light, captions written in soft reverence, the frequency of harmony, the memory of the earth. You realize that even if every claim were proven false, the story will remain beautiful and perhaps necessary. For what the digital revival of Tartaria reveals is not the existence of a hidden empire, but the existence of a hidden hunger, the human need to remember wonder. We live surrounded by machines but starved for meaning. We have power but little reverence. In that gap, Tartaria blooms like a mythic flower opening through cracks in concrete. The skeptics may dismiss it as fantasy, but fantasy too can heal. It invites us to look again at the world, to question the certainty of our maps, the limits of our understanding, the shallowness of our definitions of progress. Perhaps that is Tartaria's true victory. In the digital age, it has reminded millions of people that history is not dead. It breathes through us in our questions, in our doubts, in our dreams. The screen dims, the hum of your computer fades. You look out the window at streetlights, towers, the geometry of your own city. For a fleeting moment, you wonder if its foundations, too, rest on something older. And then you smile. Because you realize that in a way we have rebuilt Tartaria not in marble or stone, but in our shared imagination. A digital empire of wonder rising not from ruins, but from longing. The servers hum like distant cathedrals. The data flows like the ancient ether. And in the quiet between your thoughts, you can almost hear it, the old empire whispering through circuits and dreams. Remember us not as we were, but as you hoped we might have been. The empire within the imagination. The night is still. The wind has quieted. Only the steady breath of the world remains that soft hum you've been hearing through every part of this journey. It's not the hum of machines or of history, but something deeper, quieter. The resonance of thought, the faint vibration of imagination remembering itself. And now, after maps and mud towers and myths, energy and echoes, you arrive at the end, or perhaps the beginning. The Tartarian Empire stands before you once more. But this time it is not made of marble or steel, not drawn across continents or buried under soil. It exists within you, within every mind that has ever looked at an old map and whispered, "What if you close your eyes?" In the darkness, it begins to take shape. Cities of gold and silver rise from the plains. Domes gleam like suns. Canals run with crystal water. There are towers that hum with unseen power, streets lit by radiant orbs that need no flame. You see artisans working in quiet harmony, sculptors, builders, philosophers, and musicians, each attuned to the same silent rhythm. There are no borders here, no wars for possession. Only patterns balance in the murmur of wind through spires that hum softly with energy drawn from the sky. This is the Tartaria of the mind, the empire that has survived every empire that claimed to replace it. Because what is a civilization truly? Is it its bricks, its kings, its armies, or is it the idea that endures when the walls crumble? The historians say Tartaria never existed, that it was an error of geography, a cartographer's shorthand for the unknown. The believers say it was an empire, erased its technologies, suppressed its architecture, misattributed its very memory buried. But as you sit here between the two, you begin to sense a third truth, one that lives not in books, but in the spaces between them. Perhaps Tartaria is not a lost empire, but a symbol of everything humanity once was and might become again. It is the dream of harmony between knowledge and spirit, between invention and art, between progress and reverence. It is the belief that beauty and truth once shared a language, and that we have only forgotten how to speak it. Every generation tells stories of lost golden ages. Atlantis, Lemuria, Shangri-La, El Dorado. Tartaria has joined their company now, but with one difference: it is a myth born not of ancient texts, but of modern rediscovery. It rose not from temples or ruins, but from the archives of our own world, resurrected by curiosity and the hum of electricity. And perhaps that too is fitting. For Tartaria's rebirth in the digital age shows that myth itself evolves just as we do. The empire lives now in the shared imagination of millions of artists, historians, skeptics, wanderers, all searching for something that feels like truth even if it cannot be proven. It is a collaborative creation, a story written by countless voices whispering across time. You look around your room, the books, the maps, the light of your screen, each one a gate between centuries. In their glow, the boundaries between fact and feeling fade. History is no longer a straight line, but a circle looping through memory and wonder. And there in that circle, Tartaria stands eternal. It is the city beneath the mud, the voice beneath the silence, the glimmer of symmetry that stirs the soul. It is every moment when you've looked at an ancient building and felt it pulse with something greater than design. A whisper of intelligence that transcends time. That whisper is what keeps a legend alive. It is not deceit nor delusion, but devotion, the same devotion that built pyramids and observatories, cathedrals and star forts, all reaching toward the same invisible harmony. You realize now that Tartaria's true power lies not in being proven real, but in refusing to die. Empires built on conquest crumble. Names fade from memory, but a dream of unity, of balance, of lost brilliance endures. Because dreams belong not to governments, but to people. And people, when they dream together, create civilizations no fire can burn and no empire can erase. You think of the old maps once more, the ones that first carried the word Tartarian. Their ink has faded, their paper brown, yet somehow their message survives centuries of silence to reach this moment, to reach you. Maybe that was the empire's plan all along. Not to rule, but to remind. To remind you that the world is older and stranger than we admit. That beauty and wisdom are not inventions of progress, but echoes of eternity. That imagination itself is the oldest technology we possess, and perhaps the only one capable of rebuilding what time has taken. You lean back, letting your eyes close fully now. The hum of the lamp merges with the wind outside, with the pulse of your own heartbeat. And in that sound, soft and steady, you hear the Empire's last secret, that Tartaria was never buried. It was simply waiting in the hidden corners of the human mind, in the spaces between what we know and what we dream. When you open your eyes again, the world looks the same, your city, your century, your reality. But somewhere beneath the pavement and the noise, you sense it, the geometry of something vast and quiet humming beneath everything. The empire of the imagination, the one that never fell. And as you drift towards sleep, you realize that you have walked through its streets all along, in every question, every wonder, every breath of awe that reminds you that the unknown is not emptiness, but invitation. And the whisper returns like a song fading into dawn. We are not gone. We are you remembering.